Capitalism at its essence, then, is a competition of giving.
I've been on the verge of a lot of stuff during this pandemic. I've had many thoughts that I wish I didn't have, and they were instigated by the emails from the agency and the pressure to pay rent debt that I can't pay off. If I'm losing money and loads of people are losing money, why shouldn't the landlord be affected by that?
One of the most difficult choices I ever faced in life was in 2008. I think I had maybe $30 million left, or $30 or $40 million left in 2008.
Many of those who lost their income during the virus now face losing their homes.
I've made billions of dollars of failures at Amazon.com.
Coronavirus pandemic shows no signs of slowing. With so many out of work in the midst of a health crisis, the spectre of mass evictions is now real.
$250 million every single day, but there are thousands of workers who are employed by him who are earning wages so low they are on food stamps, Medicaid, and subsidized housing.
Literally billions of dollars of failures.
And when you put your blood, sweat, and tears into creating something, or building something, it's like a child. And so it's like, which one am I going to let one starve to death?
What should a customer know out there when they're clicking to buy something to have it delivered to their home?
They should know that that's our blood, sweat, and tears that's going into that. That's my back. That's somebody else's arm. That's somebody's life.
Capitalism at its essence, then, is a competition of giving.
For more on working conditions at Amazon, we're going to Britain right now to speak with journalist James Bloodworth, who spent a month working undercover as a picker in an Amazon order fulfillment center and found workers were urinating in bottles because they were discouraged from taking bathroom breaks.
We all have adversity in our lives. I doubt if you really, if you know somebody, any friend or anybody that you talk to, there's no lack of adversity. And by the way, that's good, because it's what teaches us how to get back up. You fall down, you get back up. It always happens. And you get certain gifts in life, and you want to take advantage of those. You choose to work hard. You choose to do hard things.
Capitalism is racial capitalism.
But only capitalism creates a group of people known as entrepreneurs who have no choice but to concern themselves with the needs and desires of others.
I think that culture comes out of the way that we survive. Not only I think that, but a lot of folks think that. Like, you have a fishing village, you're gonna have fishing songs. You have an agricultural village, you're gonna have agricultural songs. The racist culture that we have is necessitated by capitalism. We won't get rid of that racist culture until we get rid of capitalism.
But the genius of capitalism, and only capitalism, is that it channels self-interest into altruism. Entrepreneurs can only help themselves by helping others.
For this, it's not as if I was afraid of hard work or as if I'd never been in a kind of warehouse environment. But the atmosphere of the Amazon warehouse I worked in was what I imagine the atmosphere of a low-security prison would feel like.
Marx pointed out that what he called primitive accumulation, capital doesn't just appear from nowhere. The original capital was provided by the labor of slaves. The Industrial Revolution, which pivoted around the production of capital, was enabled by slave labor in the U.S.
And for us, because of the challenges that we have chosen for ourselves, we get to work in the future, and it's super fun to work in the future for the right kind of person.
If you took a day off sick, you were given a disciplinary for that, and if you received 6 of these disciplinaries, you would effectively lose your job. And this was taking a day off sick, even if you had a letter from the doctor, even if you phoned in beforehand to say that you were going to be sick. So if you took 6 days off sick, you would effectively lose your job, and this was the biggest employer in this town. Other things, people were afraid. People were receiving disciplinaries for taking toilet breaks. The productivity targets were so high that workers were afraid to go to the bathroom. A survey came out of the Amazon warehouse I worked in recently, which found that 74% of workers there, order pickers, were afraid to use the bathrooms because of the productivity targets. And this culminated in
James
one
Bloodworth.
day I found a bottle of urine on the shelf.
Similarly, now there's the same need, right? Because stereotypes about black folks are used to explain to the white working class that poverty is the cause of people making their own bad choices, as opposed to poverty being being necessitated by capitalism. The truth is, you cannot have capitalism without poverty. It needs it. You cannot have capitalism without unemployment. If there was full employment, 100% employment, no one could get fired because there'd be no one to replace them. Even furthermore, if you had 100% employment, people that work someplace could just demand higher wages without even having a union struggle. They need the army of unemployed workers to keep wages down.
And this turnover of staff, it's almost as if, you can't prove it, but it's almost as if it's intentional. There's this, they try to get rid of you quite quickly because then they can bring more people in who don't have the same employment rights as a full-time employee.
My job, one of my jobs as the leader of Amazon, is to encourage people to be bold.
Black lives have always mattered. We have always been important. We have always meant something. We have always succeeded, regardless. And now is the time. I ain't waiting.
Red baiting was also a feature of COINTELPRO. That's the FBI's counterintelligence program designed to surveil, infiltrate, discredit, and sabotage political movements the U.S. government felt were so-called subversive.
We see this transform in the 1960s and 1970s into COINTELPRO and the systematic targeting of Black liberation groups like the Black Panther Party, like the Revolutionary Action Movement, who again are taking up these demands for self-determination, for Black studies on campuses. These are considered to be red plots. The Black student unions are they're infiltrated by FBI workers.
It looks as if the system cannot reform itself. We've tried black faces in high places. Too often our black politicians, professional class, middle class, become too accommodated to the capitalist economy.
And now to explain poverty to people in a way that's not systematic, they need to put a behavioral pattern on poverty. One way to do that is to say, look at these others. Look what they do. This is what keeps them poor. When even white workers look at themselves as being poor, they look at themselves in terms of not wanting to act like black folks and not wanting to put this poverty on themselves, and it keeps folks divided. There's a necessity for racist stereotypes and for racism in capitalism. It will keep being generated as long as there's a necessity for it.
Because of its reinforcement of racist class structures and violent suppression of communities of color for the benefit and profitability of the white ruling class. Pretending capitalism doesn't have its roots in exploitative labor practices that were largely based on racial othering and prejudice is a delusion that supporters of capitalism either ignore or justify by saying it was just a phase and we've since abandoned those practices.
These conditions have been created by global capitalism. And I think this is a period during which we need to begin that process of popular education, which will allow people to understand the interconnections of racism, heteropatriarchy, capitalism.
Activists and leaders have taken racial justice one step further, demanding an end to capitalism. And many Black liberation thinkers have been critical of capitalism, like W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, and Hugh Q. Newton.
You got to freeze capitalism, Nixon! Freeze capitalism! That's a problem!
Beyond the inequalities that exist in capitalism between the capitalist class and the working class, disparities are even greater between the capitalist class and the POC working class, and between the white working class and POC working class. These divisions are obvious with statistics like the larger share of Black Americans being unemployed during economic booms and recessions, and studies like this one from the National Bureau of Economic Research that highlight the fact people with ethnic-sounding names are much less likely to even get callbacks for interviews than those with traditionally white names. These prejudices are rooted in exploitative colonial-era capitalism and contribute to capitalism being a system that disproportionately disadvantages working-class people of color. Capitalism also reinforces hierarchies that are rooted in racism, violence, and class domination. Think landlording, the criminal and civil legal system, or wage slavery that immediately followed literal slavery for Black Americans.
So, what does racism have to do with our economic system? First, we have to define what capitalism even is. It's an economic system in which private individuals and corporations control the means of production, aka the resources and tools used to generate wealth. And as the system evolved with time, those who had been enslaved or serfs now worked for wages. But those wages never equaled the value of the goods they produced, which is how the owners who made the profits kept growing their wealth.
Black men, we need to take care of our Black women. We need to take care of them. They are ours. They are our hearts. They are our future. We cannot demonize our own.
Amen.
We are the pillars of the family. Imagine this, a nation that is set up with individual families that are thriving, that are healthy, that communicate, that raise their children in love, have a better rate of becoming better human beings.
So what we're seeing is that the pandemic has really brought to the surface that people are doing much, much worse than is being projected. And this is obviously falling along racial, class, and regional lines. Those who are racialized as Black are suffering at a disproportionate rate or a different rate because of economic and structural factors.
They started stealing people from Africa, bringing them here, and to explain why this was different, why this was not endangering the white working class. They had to say, well, look, these are a different group of people. These are not even people. We wouldn't even do this. The theory of race was invented to justify slavery. Nations. It's not like there weren't wars or people didn't hate other people before that, but it was always talked about in terms of nations. It was nations, and sometimes there'd be descriptions of people, but the idea that this nation and that nation were related because they looked the same was not one that existed. So this idea of race was put forward to justify slavery and to say, look, these are a lower form of being. You should not feel united with them. This is not your problem. This is that. So there was a need for racism.
I'm convinced that the ultimate eradication of racism is going to require us to move toward a more socialist organization of our economies, of our other institutions.
As historian Robin Kelly puts it, capitalism developed and operates within a racial system or racial regime. Racism is fundamental for the production and reproduction of violence, and that violence is necessary for creating and maintaining capitalism. While even working-class white families benefited from capitalist economic booms, minority communities rarely did, or to a much lesser degree, because of how purposefully disadvantaged they've become at the hands of the ruling class. And when they speak out against that oppression, the state violently suppresses these voices to maintain the status quo.
Those courageous souls, the entrepreneurs who are the beating heart of capitalism, who bring us the endless material benefits we enjoy, from ATM machines to life-saving medicines, should be held up for admiration, not torn down. Altruism is the very reason for capitalism's existence, and why it remains the hope of civilization.
I need you to understand how painful this is. I need you to understand how painful it is to be reminded every day that your race means nothing. And that isn't the case anymore. That is never the case anymore. We are going to try today. We are a physical representation of our support for George Floyd. Bang on them. Bang on them. Bang on them. We are a physical representation on our support for Sandra Bland. Bang on them. We are a physical representation on our support for Trayvon Martin. We are a physical representation of our support for Stephen Lawrence. For Mark Duggan.